Hi, everyone, and welcome again to Connect Spring. My name's Peter Giannetti with the International Housewares Association, and this is the future of smart in the home. A few housekeeping notes as always before we get started. A reminder that our speakers will be taking questions at the end of the session. So please go ahead and use the Q&A function to submit your questions at any time during the session. These sessions are being recorded and they will be available on IHA's website within 2 weeks of the event conclusion, so around mid-April. Just a note that this session is sponsored by Jura, the innovation leader in automatic coffee machines, offering a true bean-to-cup experience that is freshly ground, not capsuled. Thanks to Jura for supporting today's session. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Joining us from the NPD group are Joe Derochowski, who's the Home Industry Advisor, Ben Arnold, who's the Consumer Technology Industry Analyst, and Darren Seifer, who's the Food and Beverage Industry Analyst. Complete bios of our speakers are available on the Connect Spring page at theinspiredhomeshow.com. So thank you all for being here. Let's get started. You know, the housewares industry has flirted with the connected smart technology and applications for a few years with varying degrees of success. And given the dramatic changes in consumer needs and retailing during the pandemic, smart technology seems once again right for the housewares business. But there's also growing sentiment that to be successful requires the integration of home and housewares, food, and technology. Working to solve these new consumer needs together. In this discussion, we'll view the challenge of smart through 3 distinct lenses: eating behaviors, technology, and home and housewares. So we can learn how to leverage smart to solve these new consumer needs. Welcome everyone. Joe, I'd like to start with you with a perspective on where the home industry is from your view in relation to the smart movement right now, the smart technology movement.
Well, thanks, Peter, and thanks, Darren and Ben, for joining today as well. I feel to a degree we're at two words pop in my head. The first one is the McLean burger, and then the second one is we are the right recipe. So I'll describe. If back in the 80s and 90s, I should say in the 90s, McDonald's tried this thing called the McLean burger, and it took off. It had a lot of buzz, but it never really launched because, from my perspective, the taste was not there. And so a lot of times people concluded that, you know what, health and wellness won't sell in the food service industry, in the restaurant industry. And that was an incorrect conclusion. It was both a timing issue as well as making sure the product is right. And what we're going to find out right now is a lot of times we tried this a little bit. And right now, I think the timing is right and the products to be developed will be right. The second thing that I look at is when we think of innovation, a lot of times it can start from the consumer. We find out what a frustration or pain point is and we solve it. And sometimes it does start with technology, and that does happen. And when it starts with technology, you kind of have to build in some time to find out what it solves, but it also has to have all the other ingredients. There's software programs that need to be written. There's other innovations that can happen with updates and adjustments from a technology side. It has to be right and supported by other partners like food companies and food manufacturers and restaurateurs and home people being able to bring this up. And so right now, anything that starts with technology, it has to be out there a little bit so that people know about it. So now when you start with the consumer need, you can start to pull the different clubs together and figure out how to put it together. So it's kind of as a normal path of what happens in technology. And I think right now, that especially with the needs that the consumer has right now, this is a great time to be talking about this.
Before we get to Ben to talk a little bit about where we are right now in terms of technology and smart, do you believe, Joe, that 2021 will be sort of a notable leap in terms of not just the integration of smart, but the consumer embrace of it and products that really are delivering on that promise? Or is it something that's still going to take a little time?
I think this is the starting point and it'll continue to build from here. There's a couple things. First of all, there are some industries where it's working. Like we know more than 80% of robotic vacuums have some sort of smart to it. And in essence, what the smart is happening is it's enabling the product to solve a consumer need.
Right.
So if we start with the consumer need and then utilize smart to help solve that, then it can happen. Smart is not a benefit, it's a reason to believe. And right now we have a new eating occasion that we're trying to solve with lunch, which has very little prep and very little cleanup, and smart can play a wonderful role to help solve that. We have, we're on the brink of some things that the major appliance companies are doing that are just going to transform the consumer's lives, and we have to be able to figure out how we feed into that. So we really are on the precipice of taking this off. So this year, somebody can make money if they leverage some of these moments, but in the long run, this is the future. It is what's happening in the majors is going to drive a lot of what we're about to see.
Thanks, Joe. Ben, what can you tell us now about where smart technology and the home are intersecting? What's the state of technology? What's the state of perhaps usage of things like smart speakers, Alexa, Ring, and how is this, where are we in terms of what would you tell the housewares industry when it comes to now integrating this right now?
Well, I would tell the whole housewares industry that in terms of home connectivity, smart home, all those devices, you mentioned voice speakers, consumers are well acquainted with these products, right? These are mass products. They're in more than 30% of consumers' homes at this point, which is a lot of devices out there in the wild. And everybody has their digital assistant of choice. So I think as it extends to home connectivity and doing some of these things, consumers are a little bit further along the path than maybe we give them credit for. The other part of this, and those are sort of the really popular mass adopted products. You've got other things like security cameras and doorbells, right? The other sort of suite of smart devices in tech, which are also growing at a pretty strong rate. But we see I would say, less adoption of those types of products because a lot of enthusiasts are sort of the repeat buyers. So we're still trying to get consumers into a lot of these, security types of products, home connectivity types of products. But when it comes to things with assistance built in them, I think maybe that's the common denominator here. There's been very fast, quick uptake of those products. And if I think about the role of the voice products, we'll kind of consider them for a second, the role of those products in the home, a place where they are strongest is in the kitchen.
Right.
Think about the use case around information and services. I have a Echo Show in my kitchen, and all day long it's showing me video teasers of recipe videos. And so all day long I'm getting ideas about things that I want to make for dinner. And I think that the assistants play a really critical role in that end of the kind of the use case.
Right.
I think the other part that I'm sure that we're going to talk about today is how does my technology either make me a better cook or help me answer that question of what's for dinner tonight? And those are harder, in my opinion, harder technology questions to answer, harder technology challenges for us to solve. But I think that that's where a lot of the benefit and a lot of the, right, if we're talking about sort of the futuristic home, the truly smart home, right, that's the direction that we need to go in. And if you've been to an electronics show in the last couple of years, I happen to go to a lot of them, we always see smart appliances, refrigerators, ovens, other types of smaller appliances. So, this idea of smart being built into appliances is absolutely top of mind for technology companies. But I think that there's a missing piece there, right, to really truly take this into the next dimension. And it's probably around data, right? It's probably around information around my eating habits, can inform my technology devices in my kitchen of, what type of a consumer I am. And I think that is that's the point that we have to cross if we're going to talk about a truly smart kitchen. Well,
you teed up Darren nicely. Let's talk a little bit about eating habits. But before we get to Darren, I think one of the things you're all getting to is that there might have been a technological race early on. Let's see if we can apply this technology, figure out the software, but maybe people weren't asking all of the questions they needed to ask to make sure that the products that they were delivering were really fulfilling a consumer need. And I think that's kind of why we're here today. Darren, what about eating habits and what can we learn from food behaviors right now that sort of tie into the opportunity to connect the home and housewares business, the technology business, and the food business around the idea of a better smart home?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly feel that the pandemic and the lockdowns that ensued from it have really changed how much we cook in the home and how much we rely on appliances. I mean, first of all, we're all making more meals in the home than we were before coronavirus hit. We've been tracking along at about 80% of our meals coming from the home. And at one point during the pandemic, it shot up quickly to 90%. And that mostly was because restaurants, bars, places that we could gather in were shut down and unavailable to us. But what consumers did is they realized, okay, well, I don't have all this extra time to make these meals that I now have to make out of my home. I need to find some solutions. And I think that really ties into what the other two were just saying just now about what we're seeing in other areas. We're talking about robotic vacuums. And what's really behind that isn't so much, oh, I need a vacuum cleaner for my place. It's, I need a clean home. Right. And the same thing is we're seeing in the kitchen as well. It's not so much, I need this ingredient, that ingredient, that ingredient. It's, I need to put dinner on the table. And consumers really flocked to appliances in this last year. Joe could tell you about the sales of them, but they went through the roof, and they still are. And they did so for convenience. And how could I make more meals in my home with less involvement from me? That same thing gets applied when you think about, again, robotic vacuums. It's how do I get my place clean with less involvement from me, with me doing the extra work. I think another component that really ties into this as well is digital ordering. It's just another way that technology is coming into how we bring foods to our table every day. We went from about 29% of us ordering groceries online in a typical month to 42%. Now, I don't think we're going to stay at that high level. I think we're going to come down a little bit as people get more comfortable going to grocery stores. But the fact remains is that we're harnessing technology in new ways to bring foods and beverages into our kitchens all the time. So I think it's less of a leap for consumers now because of that, the way we just greatly adopted appliances and technology to bring food to our kitchens.
I have a question for all three of you, and it's something Darren talked about. Is the purpose behind, or will the success story behind the application of smart products in the home and or the kitchen be more about automation or more about the proper information the consumers get to make sure that they're doing the job properly? So yeah, in some cases it's about less involvement. Maybe it's also about more involvement, but more confidence in your involvement with the product. Joe, why don't you talk to that effect?
I think it's a little bit of all that, as well as it's an opportunity to help inspire the consumer. When we're making our meals, we're always looking for something to make sure it's a little bit more convenient for us. We also want to make sure that whatever we're making is going to come out and going to taste good. And so what's happening is this is going to allow some of that to happen if we play it out right. People aren't using it just because it's smart and trying to be cute with it, or you're trying to solve a need. And so if this somehow can do it, it will open up those doors for all of that to play out, as well as the inspiration. Like I think one of the things Ben talks about, we're eating probably more meals from Echo Show in the last 3 months than we did in the last 10 years combined, so it's just been really good from that aspect. But that's still even just the beginning of it. There's so much more that it could do to really help inform and guide what you're going to be making. It could be a case, and like here's an out of the box. You've got restaurant operators looking to build a connection with consumers again. Is there a way that maybe through virtual meetings that they're able to provide guided cooking for you for some of their favorite dishes? Right. So instead of just going out, Darren can talk about ghost kitchens and things like that, but maybe the ghost kitchen is our own kitchen. And so there might be other ways that we can really start to think about how to use this, one in our daily lives, but even beyond.
Yeah, Ben, the technology aspect is interesting. Consumers often don't really know what goes on underneath the hood. They just expect to push a button and things work. Is there more consumer awareness of not just the efficacy of the technology, but kind of what it does? Or is that not important as we look to the future? Do the consumers, again, to Joe's point and to what Darren said, do they just want a better solution?
I think they just want a better solution. Whenever we talk to consumers about the details of technology and, what flavor of Wi-Fi, or do you have 5G or 4G or 3G? A lot of those sort of details are, don't necessarily get absorbed by consumers. I think consumers are very bottom line as a group, right? Make this better, make something more convenient, easier for me. And I think that is probably the attitude of a lot of consumers, right? And one of the things we do in technology is we add technology without sometimes a sense for what it actually does, right? It's technology for technology's sake. But I think for consumers, to their credit, to kind of go back to the earlier question, I think both convenience and making me a better cook, helping me find what I want to make for dinner tonight. I think both of those are top priority in terms of what people want smart to do for them. I mentioned sort of the informational and services part of this, and I kind of group that in with convenience in a sense. But on the other side, we've got technology that can help people be better cooks. We've got technology that can help you, know what's inside your refrigerator if you're at the grocery store and struggling to figure out what to make for dinner and what you have versus what you don't have, right? With cameras inside the refrigerator and things like, machine learning and object recognition. So there's a lot of technology that we can throw at this challenge.
What do you tell the manufacturer who's concerned about the cost of obsolescence or the cost of keeping up with the Joneses with regard to technology? Because whether it's Bluetooth one week or Wi-Fi the next week or some other technology that we haven't heard of yet, there may be some costs that are obstacles to entering this right now that they're not aware of. But a lot of that might be psychological hurdles. Are we at a point where they have to be aware of? They do have to be aware of all of those options. Is there a right direction to go? And then I want to talk to Darren about what food companies are doing to kind of develop platforms to integrate with this stuff. But we'll start with you on that issue of the intimidation factor of having to embrace a variety of different technologies.
Absolutely. And a connected refrigerator probably has a lot in common with a computer at this point. Then, I'm sure it's still a refrigerator, but what makes it smart and connected is the computer part. And yes, that's a very, I think, I don't know if the word is intimidating, but we always have feature upgrades and updates and software patches. And that is something you have to participate in if you're going to, talk about smart and make a smart product. My advice with all of that in mind is to think about a single challenge that a consumer has and try to fix that challenge, right? Start small. We're talking about bringing everything into the kitchen and making people better cooks and, all of these different options. Start with one, small problem that consumers have and, find a technology solution for that. Get really good at that. And then we can sort of conquer the rest of the kitchen. But that would be my advice, given just how quickly technology evolves and how all of these features just migrate so fast.
Darren, what do the home industry people and the technology people need to know about where the food industry is right now in terms of developing applications that connect all three? I mean, people don't necessarily think of the food business as a technology business, but in many respects, It has to be right now. Are they further along than we know in terms of creating these solutions?
Well, first thing, I just wanted to add one more thing to the last discussion. We were talking about whether they want direction or they want
sure.
Total, taken care of. I just want to add one thing. I think it's important that we don't think of consumers as just one monolithic group, because when we look at consumers, 80% of consumers fit in between two buckets. They're either considering themselves to be an okay cook or they're a pretty good cook. And based upon that, I think the technology that they would be interested in would be different. So, and naturally, the older we get, the more confident we tend to be in the kitchen. And we're looking for maybe just a little guidance versus when we're younger, we're looking for, hey, do the whole complete thing for me because I have no idea what I'm doing.
Do products have to serve all of those different consumers, or is it going to be carved up a little, do you think?
Do they what?
Does one product have to be adaptable, if you will, to multiple types of consumers just for efficiency, or is a consumer going to seek a product that's a little bit more aligned to their level, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, there might be different levels of products and what they perform, and you may be able to graduate consumers as they get older and they, move into their new homes, and that's the opportunity to get them on new gadgets for their kitchen. So it could be something like that, or something that has just served them well their whole lives and just continues to do so. So, but then your question about what is the food world doing in this current space with getting technology? I still feel like there's a pretty decent gap between manufacturers and appliance manufacturers. Really, when you think about it, if you look behind most packages that have cooking instructions on them, you've got your stovetop, your microwave, and your oven. That's it. And we talk about things like air fryers. They're probably in about 40% of homes now. We last checked this in July. It was a little bit under 40, but they've continued to sell through the roof. So I'm thinking they're above 40 now. So we still don't see many manufacturers put air fryer instructions on how to make those products either. There have been some startups too, where the technology and the food are kind of one package, where you just scan a barcode on the device and it automatically knows how to cook it, right? So that's another way you could merge the ideas of technology and food to bring a convenience to the consumer. But I think for right now, I think we're still a little bit far apart.
Do you expect, I asked Joe this question earlier, do you expect a quantum leap sooner than later with regard to this? Darren, that's for you.
Oh, for me. Sorry about that.
I expect the industry to catch up faster than they have been, perhaps.
I think perhaps this past year put us on a faster trajectory. So many things just leapfrog years into the future this year. I mentioned digital ordering already, that we weren't expecting levels where they're at now until maybe 5 years from now. So that definitely put us on a fast course. The thing to keep in mind with food and beverage preparation and consumption for that matter is that consumers are typically a little slow to change because these things are habits. If you ever try to break a bad habit, it takes a while for that thing to go away. But it doesn't mean that things aren't changing in food and beverage. So my message to all the industries involved is to be patient and persistent. Keep the drumbeat going. Consumers they'll get on the bandwagon if you just give them time and just some guidance on how to accept this technology.
Yeah, you like to talk about path to consumption. You have to be really tuned in to that path to consumption with the consumer these days, and lead them when you can or respond to them when you have to. Correct?
Yeah, and when we talk about path to consumption, we have to think about really what that is, and it's really about all the steps that lead up to the meal being made. So whether it's figuring out what you're going to make for that meal, getting the items in your kitchen, preparing, cleaning, and even afterwards, things like restocking. So it's all the steps that lead up to a meal as well as after that. A meal just doesn't start with the eating and end with the eating. So there's so many points now that we need to consider about plugging in. So that path to consumption, it's critical to understand if you're going to help consumers with their needs.
Joe, what questions aren't the home and housewares companies asking with regard to the application of smart technology? What are they missing right now? What is the gap that they need to fill?
Well, I think it started out first by people thinking about it as an app. If I am somehow connected to an app, there is a benefit to that. And sometimes there are, but in reality, that's not what we're looking for. I think instead, what the questions and what we're trying to do and what we're on the precipice of is this path of consumption that you're talking about with Darren. The major food companies or major appliance companies are about to solve the question, which is what's for dinner. That question gets asked 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, 18 or more years of your life. And you know what? At some point that gets old. And more than 60% of the time, it's based off of the items you have on hand. Well, the major appliances, and there's multiple that now have it so that they can identify what's in your refrigerator and give you a guided recipe and suggestion on what to eat. It could say, you know, your kale's about to go bad, so here are foods that you like that you can make with the items on hand. And then here are some new suggestions that are similar to that based off of an algorithm that they could build. And they could tie it by individual, they could go across. What they're missing is they're missing one, the dry goods part, which they'll be able to soon, you can do it, but you got to program it in, but pretty soon that'll be automated. And then once that's done, now you can execute on some of the recipes and suggestions that it has. Well, that's in Darren's path to consumption. That's the planning and the shopping part of it. But you still have to do the preparation. You got to do the cooking. You got to do the eating, and you got to do the cleanup, and you got to do the storage. So that means you're looking at cutlery, and you're looking at food processors and blenders being a part of this ecosystem. You're looking at all types of ways to heat the food, whether a toaster oven, air fryer, multi-cook, whatever the case, being part of it, cookware. You're looking at tableware, being able to serve it and be part of it. You're looking at food storage for the cleanup and vacuum sealers. So all these things, and I charge any of us, are we speaking to the majors? Because it all has to tie together. It's not about the app. It's about that ecosystem of fitting. Then the second question we got to ask, which is the one that you asked Ben, which is how do we handle updates? You know, we used to, a few years ago, I remember getting a scale one time and my change of software in my Fitbit, it was basically obsolete. But nowadays we see what's happening with Tesla. We see what's happening with Peloton. There's updates happening behind the scenes. If it can work for some of these products, it's got to be able to, the bar is being risen in the consumer's eyes. Because again, we're consumers. We cannot underestimate how convenient we need to make it for them. So as there are updates, it should be able to happen behind the scenes. If it does, and we tie to that ecosystem, we're set up because, as Darren said, you've got established cookers and not. And a long time ago, the young group, our primary groups, who does the weddings, who does their first homes, those are the people developing their cooking repertoire. It used to be Betty Crocker Cookbook. It was allrecipes.com. Today it's Instagram, but in the future, it's going to be that appliance. And we need to be tied to it. The last thing I will say too, which is a part of this, is kind of behind the scenes. So our food group, Darren and David, who was on yesterday, they have a report called Eating Patterns in America. And one of the things we've been doing over the last 2-3 years is putting appliance sales data in there. So now the food companies are starting getting used to seeing this and asking these questions and connecting the dots of, I need to follow this. So that's part of what's drawing them in right now too.
Ben, are there questions not being asked in the technology sector right now? I mean, are engineers and marketers talking to one another enough to understand that you can't go it alone anymore with regard to smart home? You have to take into account the full path to consumption that Joe and Darren have referenced, and it doesn't end where you might think it ends. It sometimes ends with a product in a glass container with a smart application on the lid in someone's cabinet. It's a lot broader, the scope. Do you think technology understands and is collaborating with full kind of knowledge of the realm of this possibility?
I have to think so. When we talk about the connected home, right, it's a lot of platforms. We kind of mentioned that word a couple of times today, and ecosystems and different technology companies that own different parts of ecosystems. So there definitely is a lot of information sharing, but I think it's on the technology side. And to kind of go back to what some of the things that Joe was saying, I think there needs to be a little more maybe cross-industry collaboration. And again, as I think about the usefulness of a smart oven or a smart refrigerator, I keep coming back to this idea of data, right? That we need data. Data powers and makes things intelligent, right? We have Bluetooth, we have Wi-Fi, that's kind of the pipe, but what lets a device act intelligently is the data that it gets. And maybe I said this earlier, but I think to get to this ideal of a smart kitchen that can serve all my needs and make me a better cook and help me find what I want to have for dinner, I think there needs to be a big injection of data, of user data, right? To help understand me as a consumer, understand my family as eaters, And to me, that is the component that I think is missing in, in the growth of the smart kitchen. And that's, how do we inform the technology with information that lets it operate more smartly?
Darren, you mentioned this it's not a one size fits all consumer when it comes to this. One of the things, I think there's this perception that generations have a different approach to behaviors when it comes to smart technology, or at least expectations. Are you seeing real differences in generational patterns evolve the last 12 months that may indicate who, or maybe all of them, are ready for this, or maybe just some of them are ready for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty true for in most cases that when we talk about new technology, it tends to be some of the younger adults who might be able to not only adopt it faster, but understand it a little bit faster. That's not a knock on anyone who might be a boomer or a senior on the line. It's just historically how technology has gone. So when we look at how consumers get ideas for what they're going to make for dinner, for example, we still see that boomers, seniors, still rely on cookbooks more than any other generation. The younger you go, it's more about, as Joe was saying, the social media sites out there, Pinterest as an example, like Gen Zs and millennials like to use. But again, the older you go, they're really not involved with that very much. I could also tell you a personal story here. So for last holiday season, I thought it would be great if I got my parents a multi-cooker. They are also complaining about all the extra work that they're doing in their home to make meals. And when they got it, they said, we're not really sure we could use this. And I said, why? It does all this great stuff for you at the push of a button. And I even pointed out some recipes like potatoes, and they said, well, we know how to do that. So they actually returned it. So I think there's definitely something out there that would say that, yeah, the younger we go, the more likely we are to adopt it. Now, the thing is, though, they're also, the younger we go, the lower we typically are in the income spectrum. So it also has to be affordable for them to be able to adopt it at the same time.
Well, that's when we talk about the challenges of updates and obsolescence. There's a lot of recurring costs in terms of keeping smart technology up to date. Joe, I want you to kind of follow up on that in terms of what you might be learning about sort of the generational gap in smart home, and is that changing, or has that changed in the last several months?
Well, I'll talk overall sales of our products first before smart. Like, we've seen the growth that all age groups have grown, but the one that grew the fastest was 55 plus. Again, think of that empty nester and retire. So they get those two huge life moments where they're making some big decisions on where they live and how they live. That grew the fastest. The second was actually 18 to 24-year-olds. And that normally they're not the ones growing that fast, but because of the pandemic, whether they moved in with their parents and instantly got tired and moved out on their own, but whatever the case, they started moving out and actually trying to figure out ways to cook. So they're the group that grew the second fastest. So that opens the door. Now, as it relates to smart, it's still so early that it's hard to measure. There's not a lot of products that are in there just yet, but they would easily be adapted if it solves a need. And that's where we got to get solved. And I started thinking about going back to one of Ben's comments that he said before, is like, how do we make, and I guess it's a question for you, Ben, I'll ask, is how do we get, what other industries have the machines talking and gathering data? Like, I got to believe it's in ink printers and things of that nature, but like, what are other industries doing to utilize the product they sell to get the information on the consumer about the usage?
Ben?
Well, so everything in tech at this point is connected, right? And you mentioned printers, right? Your printer knows when you're out of ink and can actually order it for you in a lot of cases. But one thing that I'll kind of piggyback to what Joe was saying on goes to sort of the adoption of these technologies in the home. And I like Darren's sort of anecdote about buying his family an instant or a multi-cooker, and them saying, right, we already have these existing cooking habits, and this doesn't necessarily help us. We already have these habits ingrained in us. And I think that that's what technology is up against, right? Is that of course, you have different types of cookers, different types of consumers, but these are attitudes that are ingrained in what we do every single day. Now, right, technology likes to sort of puff its chest out and say, well, we can change people's habits. We've always got a better way of doing things. And that may very well be in some of these, smart kitchen cases, but I've been preparing food the same way for more than 30 years. And it has to be a very strong case to get me to change, what I'm doing. But I think that's a very important piece as we kind of consider what's happening with smart and consumers' uptick in it, is that people have been doing things this way for so long. Is the technology adding to it? Is it making the experience better, or is it just more technology that we're layering?
You underscore really why we're here today, because we could be looking at three industries talking to one another right now. One's technology, one's home and housewares, one's food and beverage. But really what it's about is the consumer lifestyle that is at the center of this conversation, rather than dealing with three different tunnels or silos of development. And you raise the point. Technology thinks it can do this, and whatever anybody else says, forget it. Housewares thinks, well, this is the way we've done it for 50 years. Who's going to tell us otherwise? And Darren has, can't get them to use a malter cooker because that's been their behavior. So it really does. And this is kind of almost a way for wrapping up this discussion today. Let's go around the horn. This really requires an entire shift in the approach, product development, design approach on all facets, to come out not with three messages that are cooperative messages, but one common message. Darren, I'm going to start with you on kind of wrapping up this whole discussion in a bow, where you think this will end up, and food and beverages role in this right now.
Well, again, I think what we were talking about, what needs are we solving for consumers, still have to be front and center. I like Ben, I like what you said about how technology likes to puff its chest out and say, well, this is going to change it for you. But at the same time, you have to make sure that you're solving for a need. But, what COVID did this year is I just feel like it just made people so much more present and aware of their kitchens like no year has done in our history. We've spent so much more time in it. We have gotten more appliances to help us along the way with it. And with that, I still feel like consumers are saying, I wish things could be different. I wish things could be easier. And it just all the technology that, Ben has been talking about too, whether it's from monitors, cell phones, and everything else that we're adopting in our lives. The kitchen is just really the next evolution. But again, I want to reiterate that we have to be patient and persistent with this, because this is not like a mobile phone where you get a new one every single year, or you get an update every few months. You buy a refrigerator and that thing will be there for years. So, you got to understand that consumers aren't going to be looking to replace that every single year. So we need to make sure that we're really tuning into what they need right now and solving for that in this moment.
Thank you, Darren. Ben, I'm going to go back to you in terms of, it's a chance to continue this conversation around the cooperative nature of the challenge and the opportunity right now. And it's not really something that gets solved in that typical chamber of the technology engineer, if you will.
Well, I think that what technology offers are a lot of tools, right? A lot of ways to connect devices, a lot of ways to bring you information wherever your eyes are. And, those are very powerful tools to eventually change somebody's habits, to reference my earlier comment. But what I think it will take to make the smart kitchen a reality is probably an appliance company with the DNA of a technology company and the essence of a food firm, right? A company that has an understanding of sort of these multiple focus points, that is nimble, that can really think very thoughtfully about the consumer needs in the kitchen and proceed that way, right? A a lot of times we get that kind of energy from small startup firms, right? Again, to take a page from my technology background. Sometimes, right, it takes an unusual player to make a big impact.
What you're saying is there might be a disruptor out there that we don't know right now.
Right, another technology buzzword, technology buzzword, disruptor. So I think that it's going to take a company that maybe is not following the usual rules of the market to think outside the box and to do something drastic in the kitchen. Again, we've had these tools that are going into smart appliances for a long time. I think what we need is a company to kind of rethink how you leverage those tools, and again, with a very clear focus on consumers and the consumer experience.
Well, Joe, to that point, this industry can either wait for that disruptor and have to deal with the consequences of that, and we know how challenging that can be, even though that opens eyes, or someone within the industry can become the disruptor. What do you think is next with regard to that unique dynamic?
It gets into a little bit the first question you asked, why now? If you think about it, the group that does the most in our industry that we look at a lot tends to be that younger person who is just about to get married and just about to have your first child and just about to buy a home. Like that little segment of life, there's a lot of learning that happens. And as Darren will say, so that's what we're covering in the home industry. The food industry, that's the group when they start to really develop their cooking repertoire, what they make and what they can't make. You start having kids at home, it plays out. And then similarly, from a technology perspective, that's the group that is one of the most technology savvy groups that is right there. So right now, this target is really kind of the best of all three worlds. And where we should be aiming ourselves right now is simply, how can we solve lunch better? Start there. How can we solve breakfast better if you want a second place? How can we solve dinner better on a third place if it's a rush night, or if it's a full meal, let's say like Thanksgiving? Thinking about that technology that allows you to solve those moments right now is probably the starting. And where I'd be focusing on are those exact groups that we have.
Yeah, it's interesting. Darren makes a point that even though we often find ourselves in technology races, because it's such a race to be first or a race to invent the next great solution, because of the dynamic that involves food and behavior, it's not going to be a fast race. This is something that can take a little time. And we've learned that sometimes it's best to be second and learn from the person who was first and failed, rather than be first and out on the limb. And I'm not saying one way is going to end up being the right way this time around, but I have a feeling if we have this conversation even 6 months from now, there's going to be something that was added to it. Go ahead.
One last thing with it is, it may be obvious, and we asked the question because it's rare that we've even gotten together here. But I go to CES, it's hard to find small appliance companies there. And it's almost impossible to find food companies there. If we go to Smart Kitchen Summit, let's say, you'll see Housewares folks there. You'll see some technology folks, but you don't always see the food company folks there. Or you may not even see the right technology folks there. If we go to FMI or the food industry, do you see small appliance people there? Sometimes. You don't see any technology people there. Right. So part of it is just trying to get to these other groups and network, whether it's at these shows, whether these guys can introduce you to people at these different areas. But I think part of it is just starting to get to understand where these people are thinking and thinking about the world differently.
The challenge is sometimes the word smart, the use of the word smart. It can kind of become innocuous over time, and what is smart to one person isn't always smart to the next. Darren, wrapping up with you quickly, any final thoughts before we get into some of the questions that our audience has? Are you seeing more of an appetite? And I'm sorry I used the word appetite with you, but it was quite frankly intentional. Are we seeing a bigger appetite in your industry for this cross-industry knowledge right now, this cross-industry insight?
For sure. Joe mentioned the annual report, Eating Patterns in America, and now we're including things like appliance sales in it. And, every time I prepare for these client meetings, they're all asking about what's going on with appliances now. They fully understand that there are changes in the ways that consumers are approaching preparation of foods and beverages in their homes. And, if they're not paying attention to that, they're going to get, left in the dust. So they're absolutely, they absolutely want to stay on top of this as well. And, and getting back to the point where I was saying you had to be patient, habits don't change very often, but if you have a solution that requires very little of them in terms of changing behaviors, or even requires even less of them once that solution is out, that might be something that they could adopt more quickly. I use a phrase, I use it in other parts of food and beverage, but it seems like it works here too. It's, how do I achieve substitution without sacrifice?
Right.
So can you have them substitute the method, but not sacrifice taste, time, or even get time back? And so substitution without sacrifice applies here too.
Sometimes you can force that change, or you can recognize and adapt to that change. And sometimes a once in a lifetime health event changes things overnight, and it puts the industries to the test in terms of how far along they are or how fast they can adapt. Ben, let's wrap up with you quickly on the any final thoughts on the role of technology, and do technology companies, are they taking the food industry seriously? Are they taking the home industry seriously? I presume the answer is to some degree yes, but do they know the full depth of the opportunity that's in front of them to help make success out of those businesses?
I don't know that they know the full depth, but they absolutely are taking the food industry and what consumers are doing in their kitchens very seriously. There's a huge opportunity there. And if I think about, again, like this idea of tech and where has tech sort of disrupted or made inroads in other industries, like that's happening all around us, right? We've got electric cars that drive themselves now, and beauty products that have Bluetooth built into them to help you analyze your skin. So technology is impacting so many other industries, and I think that's something important to point out, right? That if you are a company making a product, in a lot of ways you are a technology company, even if there's no tech going into your product. You've got an app. People are interfacing with your brand on devices, right? You've got a stake in the tech industry. So I think that's important to keep in mind. But yes, just as there are technology companies working in so many of these other areas, outside of, consumer electronics, there are companies trying to solve these problems in the kitchen. And I don't know, I might term it as a little bit of a moonshot type of an endeavor, right? This is a very much habitual, as we've stated. There are a lot of components to finding what to eat, to making it, to cleaning up afterwards, to things like accessibility to everybody in the house. So there are a lot of, I think, angles for technology companies to impact in and around the kitchen. And maybe the view is, which one can we impact?
Right.
What is maybe not easiest, but what's something that's significant that doesn't entail boiling the ocean that we can change with technology? Those are the places that I'd be looking at if I were in this space.
Thanks. I have one quick question, a couple of questions for the audience, but one that I want to get to right away. And it's actually an interesting question with the application of technology and the digital assistants. Privacy issues have become real important. Is there anything to discuss right now in terms of another opportunity for privacy to become a concern? Is that holding the consumer back when it comes to these products? Joe, I'd start with you on that.
Well, I'm sure it's going to hold some people back. I mean, it is going to be clearly a concern for certain consumers. And there are ways that we have to work around it. And there's ways that you can kind of help solve that and alleviate that need. So when that happens, I think there's ways that we can solve it, but it is clearly something that needs to be addressed as part of the process.
And is there any progress with regard to what the home business can understand about helping to mitigate these privacy issues? Where does that technology sort of move from here?
We seem to always have solutions for security, and especially in the connected home, you've got applications that can run on your router to kind of protect your information. But as we keep pushing into this new space with connectivity and devices and new features, right, indelibly there are security concerns that pop up, privacy concerns that just come up as as we innovate. So I believe that, privacy is always going to be, one of the top 2 or 3 things on consumers' mind. And I think for manufacturers, for companies that are getting into this space, it's always going to be something that you have to work on. And again, as we innovate, new privacy concerns always pop up. And I think that is another, another sort of, it's table stakes for getting into, the smart and connected space is understanding and being able to, put everyone at ease around privacy and security concerns. Yes.
Thanks. Darren, is there anything on the issue that I'm not sure if there's a direct correlation to what's going on in food and beverage now? The one thing I think about with food and beverage is, is there a continuing evolution of scan-based applications that sort of link? You talked about the recipe development isn't as far downstream with regard to that, but are we starting to see more code-based applications that are facilitating sort of automated processes? And is that a continuing goal of that industry right now?
Somewhat. I mean, you could certainly find packaging that have a QR code or something like that will take you to how to make it or alternative ways to make it. A lot of what we see happening, though, are, for instance, our Gen Zs. They're going online and sharing ideas. And that's actually one way that we're actually seeing that generation kind of approach this. So they'll take something that they found online and they'll make it kind of to their own taste. I guess in many ways that'll be kind of paring it down, given the cooking skills that they typically have at that life stage. So I think for right now, that's where we see that happening. Privacy is not something that I'm used to talking about being in the food world, but as they move closer and closer to this, that might be something they need to be concerned with.
Right. Joe, any thoughts on kind of what the secret ingredient that is? And we talked a lot about it, but is there one thing right now that if you had to say, do this first before you get started, what is that one thing?
Follow these 2 guys and their social media. Well, no, I say it because they're posting stuff about their industry, and you'll learn things about different folks in those industries. And because of that, if you can start building connections and with some of the major food companies, with some of the major technology companies, and understanding where they're heading, so that you can learn from them and be able to think differently of what's possible for the needs that are out there. That's probably the first step I would do, is just start to get used to who these companies are. And we can help introduce, but it's also a case where I really think we have to have a better understanding of what's going on out there.
Ben, if there's one thing that a starting point as it relates to the technology side of this that needs to be assessed before you can take that second step from the standpoint of what you're recommending to the home and housewares industry, what would it be?
I think it would just be to keep consumers first, and just to keep in mind, the use cases attached with technology and how real people might be using it, as opposed to maybe how your employees might be using it, but really a deep understanding of how the technology can benefit a lot of those pain points that we've talked about in the kitchen. I think that's the most important.
Thanks. Darren, what's the one thing that might surprise people about what's going on in the food business now that will become a factor perhaps in the development of smart kitchen or smart home products going forward?
Well, I mean, first of all, restaurants, I think, are pretty resilient right now. So in that regard, I think consumers are going to find new ways to get food in their kitchen, but they're also going to be harnessing, once again, technology to do it. So I think what drives people away from home is also what we need to think about. How do we keep them back in? So, one of the biggest reasons why people go out to restaurants is that they don't want to cook. And so if there's ways that we could, Joe always talks about things to listen for, like I wish, I want, I hate. And, not to steal that, but I think those are some of the things that they need to listen to help consumers along this journey.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey this afternoon that is going to continue to take twists and turns. I think the encouraging news now is that the three businesses are talking to one another at NPD, and you're beginning to encourage the industries to look at each other as partners on this journey that'll end up benefiting everyone. I want to thank Darren, Joe, and Ben from the NPD group for joining us this afternoon. This will wrap up our session today on the future of smart in the home, and the future looks bright, but we'll just have to kind of follow it down that path. I'd like to thank them for their insights and for everyone for attending. As mentioned earlier, these sessions will be posted on IHA's website in mid-April. Thanks again to Jura for their sponsorship of this event. And we will see you at the next Connect Spring sessions. Take care, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye now.